Yeah, so I was going to explain about the two shows I've got opening at the moment. One in Dallas, which opens next week, and that is mainly focused on recent work. Paintings have been made in the last 2 years, but it also has a sort of more of a back history as well. So there's a painting from 1988, which I made at college, and then sort of about another 10 paintings, which sort of give you a bit of a snapshot of different things that I've made over the last few years, and which is really exciting. And then this exhibition in Waddington Custot Gallery in London focuses on work in the last, I guess, made last year, and some things are just drying as we speak. So it's kind of been very fresh and a little bit frantic to get it all done on time.
You've clearly had a very busy couple of years.
I'd say that, yeah. And kind of, I think, doing exhibitions concurrently is very good for profile, very good for press and for career, very bad for mental health. That is, I'm starting to feel my age, I guess.
You talked in 2017, there was an interview where you were discussing where you wanted to get sort of unexpectedness and chance into these seemingly very controlled poured paintings. Looking at the puddle behind you, clearly this is chance and serendipity. It looks absolutely perfect though. How many of these do you have to scrap before you decide?
I've got good at them. So what I tend to do now is to work out the sequence of colours before the paintings are made. So there's a lot of scrapping and making studies and working out how the paintings are actually going to be done. And some of them don't work out, but I'm much more rigorous about the start-up for it. So it's kind of planned much more carefully, and that means that I don't need to trash as many. They're quite. There's quite a lot of things that happen as they go along, and the way that the lines are poured into each other allows for sort of, for different lateral widths of mark, and as you sort of said, what happens at the bottom, it can really take me by surprise. But in general, I sort of think of it a bit like a kind of multi-coloured waterfall, something like that. So it has sort of these cascades of colour, but then it kind of spreads out. This is something that happened really, I would say, through sort of a studio accident. It's not something that I kind of planned to do, but I noticed when I was making paintings in the studio that the lines of paint were kind of coming down and then puddling and pooling on the floor, and it was just such a dynamic part of the work that I kind of thought, I need to find a way of incorporating that into the paintings. So it took a couple of years to really figure out the sort of technical side of it, but I knew that there was something very interesting there, the sort of paradox between these two different planes. So they kind of, for me, they're about as close as painting and sculpture can get together, and I like the sort of dynamic between the two things.
There's such a rhythm, such a clear rhythm in your pictures, and I know you're a drummer. It's almost like you're looking at a drum roll with a cymbal splash at the end.
I think
do you ever think about the parallels between your music?
The way, absolutely, I think they are a drummer's paintings in the sense that the line is very metered and very modulated, and in fact I have to be quite careful when I'm making the paintings not to kind of speed up too much. They sort of have to have that sort of pulse to them.
Which is a drummer's problem, isn't it?
I think it is, timing, you've got to, yeah, absolutely, you really have to kind of hold it together, but that somehow, that tension between the sort of the rigor and the pulse and the beat, and then the way that certain elements happen, all those accents and those incidents, that's just a really sort of, it seems to visually very, be very attractive. It sort of really draws me in. And it's funny because it's something when you talk about it, it doesn't necessarily make sense in terms of language, but in terms of visuals, it really sort of makes sense. And I think that's something that I've learned as I've kind of got older, is that sort of just to trust my eyes a little bit and not to kind of, when you talk about it to people, when I first started explaining what I was going to do, they'd kind of be like, oh, all right, that sounds great, and then, but the actual results are the things that I'm interested in.
And what's your starting point for the colours? We've got a lovely spectrum of colours around this gallery. I read that you had started exploring being inspired by other painters' work, and sort of exploring how you could sort of, I guess, represent the balance of colours in their work, or just
absolutely. Well, I am very interested in taking a source for the inspiration of each of the paintings, a colour source. So it might be an artist's work, it might be a walk in a field, It could just be something that I see around me. You know, sometimes in the past it might be like a sequence of colours from the Simpsons cartoon. You know, it just really depended if it was something that really struck me as interesting. And the reason I like that is because after making the paintings for a couple of years, I started to feel my choice of colours was becoming quite predictable to me, and I was starting to put particular things together and started to do that more and more often. And I was thinking, okay, you know, I need to break that up. So looking at another artist's work means that I will take colour combinations, things which are quite surprising. Some paintings that you think are going to really work don't. Other ones which you think would be hopeless look great. You know, it really just, it's kind of interesting how it all pans out. And it just forces me to put different sequences together. There'll be passages where it might go light or dark.
There's a really strong mood that emerges from some of these paintings, and these two in particular seem very joyous. Can you tell me a bit about the one you're standing in front of?
Certainly, this painting is inspired by a Van Gogh painting, and when I was a kid I had a poster of The Harvest in my bedroom, and I went to the Van Gogh Museum earlier this year, and I sort of just saw it again and kind of thought that would make a great painting to work from. And the thing about this, the Van Gogh, it's composed in horizontal bands of colour almost, and there's yellows and ochres which are representative of the hay, and it's one of his most beautiful paintings, I think. And then as it disappears off into the background and the mountains and the sky, it becomes blues and turquoises and greys. I mean, if you look at my painting and sort of tip it round, you can almost see, if you turn this onto the horizontal plane, you can see those kind of bands of yellows and blues, and then how that sort of fades off. So you can kind of get a sense of that original inspiration from my piece. And I think because Van Gogh was such a master with colour, it's a really extraordinary person to sort of look at and to really kind of sort of research, in fact, and just the way that he put sort of contrasting colours together. It's just really extraordinary.
And what about this one?
This one is actually from
it's
from a Bonnard painting called The Place, and actually I played around with sort of almost inverting this painting and sort of mirroring it, so it's called The Mirrored Place, because it's almost has this mirrored effect from it. And that painting, the Bonnard, is part of the Phillips collection I saw in Texas. So often I go, and if I see a painting I really like, I'll just take my camera phone and just take some pictures of it, and then I can use that to sort of work back from, and they kind of provide a little bit of a sort of memory, a trigger for me.
That sounds like a lovely, pleasurable experience in a way. You're immersing yourself in the components of that painting.
I think, it's a way of looking at another artist's work so closely, you really get to understand how they put certain components together, and it's a lovely thing to do. You know, I really enjoy it. I mean, but you know, the sources of the paintings can come from other things too. So in this exhibition, there's a painting which is kind of reminiscent of a walk that I took going through a bluebell field, and there's another one, a painting exhibition called The Field, which is from a poppy field. I walked through a poppy field and I took a film of it, and you know, I just really loved the way that there's some very unexpected colours in that. So there's, you know, reds and saturated scarlets and things like that which you'd expect, but then there's these off-white colours and greys and neutrals, and it's how all those things work together. I think when people often think about colour, they think, oh, you have to put lots of bright colour together, but it's actually how you offset it that really makes the difference, and that's what Van Gogh understood. You know, it's the way that the yellow in that painting isn't really yellow, it's actually an off ochre, and it's the fact that the ochres are against a blue and a turquoise that makes it so vibrant. So he really understood that. There's one, it's not in this show, but there's a painting based on a still life by Bruegel the Younger, and it's a black painting with these beautiful white flowers in the middle, and the flowers sort of disappear into the darkness. So my painting starts from the edges and is very black and dark, and as it gets to the middle becomes lighter and whiter, so you kind of have almost this shaft of light. I mean, if I was to try and do that in a painting, I'd feel it was very contrived, it would look very contrived, but because I'm sort of copying something else and replicating another piece, it doesn't feel at all contrived, it feels right, and somehow my painting echoes that, even though it's not supposed to be a representation of it, it's just a kind of a trigger.
Do you feel it's a purity of intention behind?
There is, yeah. I think, but it just seems to really work for me. I think if I've got something to resist against, then I work much better. If there's confines and constraints, then it allows me to be paradoxically more imaginative. You know, those constraints allow me to be a bit more inventive, funnily enough. So,
working on this scale, though, how do you ensure that the extraordinary range of colours you're using are going to really add up to more than the sum of their parts?
Well, what I tend to do is to make a number of colour studies which are quite intuitive. And in the gallery there's a couple of smaller paintings around here which are the sort of starting point for these paintings. And they're about 1 metre square, or they could be a little bit smaller. And they are very, very loosely done. You know, I just work on them and, and I'll see sort of passages happening and I think, oh, that's going to look horrible. But I just kind of go with it. And after a while I managed to get several of those together. And then using a computer I can sort of put those the sections that I like into a more overall composition. So I do have an idea about what the painting is going to look like, you know, before I start. However, once I start painting, some aspects of it can't be predicted. Much like a live performance of a musician, you know, they know what it's supposed to sound like, but every time they play a song, it's going to be a little bit different. Someone's, you know, the voice is going to be a bit harsher in one section. Yeah. So what I have to do is just be aware of that, and you know, if a number of lines have grouped together and become very dark, I might just offset that. So there's a bit of subtlety to it as well, but there is a sort of basic plan and structure behind the painting, so I kind of know what I'm going to get.
Do you use very analog sources, or are you quite happy to play around with digital technology to kind of...
I think I want to do a bit of both. Ideas. I mean, I'm not really interested in making sort of computer representations of the paintings, you know, but I think a computer is a fantastic tool for playing around with colour in particular, because you can kind of work into an image and then just think, oh, well, this doesn't quite work, you know, and I'll just adjust the colours on Photoshop. And, you know, so you can use it as a tool, but, you know, it is just a tool. I think, you know, it saves a lot of time for me, so that's, you know, that's very valuable. But I like to use, you know, I also very much a fan of kind of making things on paper and ripping them up and sticking them all together and collaging it. You know, it's a bit of everything, really. It's sort of 21st century technology, but also caveman technology as well. So a bit of both.
There's a lot of praise for you as a colourist, but are there not significant differences between how you look at colours on a screen, how the digital colours represent themselves, and how they look in the flesh?
They are, and I think that's why it's really important that the colour studies are sort of done in the flesh. Yeah. You know, the digital mock-up is just a way of sort of maybe taking the sections and seeing how they go together. But often we just refer back to the sort of studies themselves, because you're right, when you're really looking at the colour, it sort of flattens it out, makes it a little bit artificial. But mixing from an original painting is much easier, and it's much nicer for your eyes as well. You know, my eyes get quite tired after a while if I'm looking at a screen. So, like I say, it's trying to get the best of both parts of that, you know, and the technology's there, and I just try and use it.
What about the physical process of making these pieces?
Well, it is quite demanding, and I start from right to left or left to right. Doesn't matter. But these big paintings, the colour is applied line by line, and it's built up. Each panel, there's 4 panels in this painting. Each background panel has a ground colour which is sprayed a different colour to the one next to it, and that allows me to have different colour weights. So for example, on this one there's a red, a blue, a turquoise, light turquoise, and then a kind of more magenta-y red, and that just gives me something cold and hot to work with, and it creates a lot of depth as well to begin with. I mean, a painting like this will probably take 3 or 4 days to make, and because the colour is wet at the bottom, I have to sort of work over a period of days like that, so that it kind of can flow into, the colours can kind of flow into each other and give the impression that it's sort of still fluid, and it looks a bit weird if they're left to dry and then you work over it. You know, they're kind of funny things to do. They are performative, but it's a long drawn out performance, you know, so it's something that I've kind of trained myself to do over a period of years and got better at doing it. Some of the paintings I made in the past were made quite quickly, in fact, you know, over a period of maybe minutes or even sometimes seconds. And this is a much more drawn out, longer time process. And I quite like that because it allows me to sort of work into a painting, you know, much more gently. And, you know, I find that, you know, it's really important that I keep my focus and my concentration. I've got better at kind of being able to wipe them down, so that, you know, if sections don't work, I just wipe it down and then kind of restart that section again. In the past, again, I mean, I would make the painting and kind of go, oh, I don't like that bit, but I'll just keep on going. And I've learned that if I don't like something, I just have to make a quick decision that it's not right and just, you know, go for it and just take it off. So, but they're really fun things to do. You know, they're really fun things to make. You know, I really enjoy what I do.
I can imagine they're quite meditative.
They are, and you know, I mean, you know, I like listening to music, so I listen to a lot of music when I make them.
What do you listen to?
I mean, it's all sorts of stuff, really. You know, it can be...
This in particular?
I can't remember what I was listening to. Probably all sorts of kind of tragic rock from the 70s or something like that, some teenage rock stuff. I'm not allowed to play at home, I should imagine, something like that. Yeah.
When you were doing a painting like the one over there and a couple around the corner, where, you know, there's clearly been a sort of shift to the board that you're using, how do you coordinate that? How do you choreograph that with all the lines of paint?
The paintings, like the small one in the corner, are made on very thin metal sheets. In fact, these are as well, and the metal sheets allow me to bend the substrate, so when the paint comes down, it full puddles and pools at the bottom. When it's dry, we're able to push that back and then mount it onto a canvas or a panel. The same here, when the painting's dry, again, it's a very thin metal sheet, and we're able to cut round that and then to template that up and to stick a sort of a thick metal plate underneath it to make it solid. So the impression is that it's been made in the space, but it allows me to disassemble it. And the reason for doing that was that I just did a number of wall installations in galleries, but there was always a problem with the logistics of the setup. You know, the wall wouldn't be quite flat enough, or wasn't, you know, dry, or there'd be I'd run out of time or paint or something, you know. So I decided that to try and make these under studio conditions would be, you know, better for my mental health.
In the Dallas show, it must have been nice picking out some of your earlier works to kind of accompany the newer ones. To anyone who's seeing the work in this show, they'll be amazed to see some of your quite monochrome, very minimalist sort of work.
I think it was quite a shock when people, when I made a sort of transition, I had quite a lot of early success with those monochromatic paintings, which I really, really loved. I thought they were very beautiful.
They are.
Thank you. But they were also, didn't allow me that much sort of scope for kind of moving around. And I think, you know, I just wanted to, I'd been making them for 2 or 3 years, and I was in my early, you know, to mid-20s, and I kind of felt that that was just like aeons of time, you know. It's just like, oh my God, I've been doing this for years and years, you know, I need to do something else. And I just one day I painted a canvas yellow, and it was just such a shock in this studio with everything black and grey. It was just like, oh wow, colour. So I made a series of paintings which were very, very bright and colourful, and shocked all my audience and completely horrified a lot of them as well. But I kind of thought there was something really interesting about those paintings. They were quite sort of brash, and it was my first sort of foray into using colour and trying to use it in a structural way, I guess, as well. You know, and I really like them. They've got a lot of energy. But I guess, you know, I followed my nose as an artist. I think I've sort of moved around quite a lot. Done, you know, even though the same sort of basic ideas and interests have been there's been lots of different shifts, and I've tried lots of different ways of making paintings. And I think sometimes it's difficult for an audience, particularly at the beginning of an artist's career, because they're not quite sure what you're about. And they put you into a certain box, and then you kind of like completely, you know, do something out of that box. It just doesn't fit. And I think, you know, I struggled with that for a while. You know, the reception of the paintings, people didn't kind of understand why I was making them, and you know what I was trying to get at as an artist. And then what would happen was that after a number of years, people would actually come round to it, and by that time, you'd also want to move on again. So it was like this completely sort of shifting thing. But as I've got older, I've kind of started to slow down in that sense, and things have sort of, you know, the shifts tend to be a little bit more subtle and a bit more, much more subtle, I guess. So I'm just playing around with certain parameters at the moment. Actually, one thing, maybe getting a bit older, is that instead of changing from one group of paintings to another, what I've been doing is sort of continuing with one sort of, one kind of method of working, but then introducing other things. And I'm interested in the dynamic that they can create in a room. So I think that's probably, you know, the way that I'm going at the moment. So you have things which, even though the look of them might be quite different, they have links. So for example, some of the works on paper in the show are splatted sort of marks. They're quite aggressive in a way, quite punky looking. But they still have a rhythm to them. They're still about timing and materials. And yet they're made with a syringe as well. So they kind of have a link, even though they might, you know, aesthetically look quite different. I think they sit very well together. These paintings are made on metal, and it's quite cold and mechanical material, and works on paper are much more organic and have a softer edge to them. these actually have a deckled edge to them as well. And I like those things, you know, they kind of just gives it some warmth in an exhibition too. And, you know, the paintings, the diagonal paintings, for me, the colours are all poured at the same time, so there's almost like this sheet of colour, and it allows a lot more compositional variance to open up. You know, you can play around with, you know, again, lines sort of widening or compressing, but they, you know, I'm able to actually shift the whole kind of composition to make these different moves. And I guess these paintings compositionally are kind of quite rigid in a sense, so it allows colour to become the sort of focus, whereas the other paintings, the colour combinations are much more pared down. So, you know, there's lots of different ways that you can play around with this. I mean, it's fun. It's a fun thing to do, you know, just kind of like you can, you know, yeah, I enjoy making my work.
It is about having the confidence to play.
Well, play is a kind of, it's often seen as a derogatory word in art, but I think it's very, very useful, and, you know, to have that sense of play, it's kind of what, you know, made me want to make paintings in the first place, you know, and it's a way of exploring the world. But I think it's important to have that balance between rigour and, you know, enjoying what you do. You know, if you make art all day long, you know, you have to ultimately get something out of it yourself. And I think most artists also know that at times they're either overlooked or, you know, they're not going to sell their painting. So if you fundamentally enjoy what you do, you can't go wrong. You know, it's like ultimately it's that connection between you making something and then the other things aren't so important.
And keeping the curiosity alive.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think, you know, we sort of touched on the idea of studio accidents, but I think being aware that what happens in the studio, or, you know, that kind of pot of paint falling over, or just actually painting paint pots, which is what I did, you know, right at the very beginning. You know, just the thing that's around you can be the source of the inspiration and can just open up a whole load of different possibilities. And I think that's you know, it's not inventing stuff, it's just being aware of things and then kind of going, no, that's the art. Maybe that's the confidence, I think, of getting older, is just kind of go, actually, that can be art. You know, all that accidental stuff, that can, but you've got to make something of it. You've really got to sort of kind of go, that's the thing, and then really make it into something special. And then, you know, there's a lot of, you know, technical expertise in that, the right paint, you know, the right materials, and then letting it dry and cleaning up. There's a lot of sort of subtleties that go into it too.